We're honored to be joined by Eric Stiles, who's the president and chief executive officer of the New Jersey Audubon. Good to have you with us, Eric.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely.
Thrilled to be.
Hey, I'm sorry, you were going to say?
Just repeating, I'm thrilled to be on the show, and thanks for all you and your team do to bring the key stories to the Garden State.
That's very kind of you. The New Jersey Audubon, describe what it is as we put the website up.
So there's two things that we focus on. One is connecting people and nature and making sure that's a fundamental human right and not a mark of privilege or affluence. And so you can unpack that in all sorts of exciting ways in our very diverse state. And the second thing is really focusing on the Noah's Ark, making sure that the wildlife, the habitat, the waters of New Jersey today are there for future generations and hopefully in better conditions.
So let's talk about environmental justice. I want to read a quote that you've put out there, and it's profound, it's provocative, it's important. Let me take my glasses for this as you get older on the air, you know. Every person has the fundamental right to safe, welcoming, and positive experiences in nature, free of violence, threat, harassment, or harm. Why should that even be said? Why does that need to be said?
You know, sometimes you got to go back to the basics. I'll never forget there was a retreat from folks all sides of the spectrum. And it was an evangelical minister that said, look, unless the environmental community begins with visions and values, you will never be successful. You always go to strategies and tactics. So I think in order to really build people into seeing themselves as part of a big movement, a big tent, you have to be very deliberate, very inclusive. And I need to recognize that as a white heterosexual male that grew up in the Judeo-Christian faith, I'm welcome in just about every park. It is a safe experience for me and people like me.
Same here.
But that should be a human right. So there's studies after studies that show kids that grow up surrounded by nature, lower rates of anxiety, lower rates of depression as adults. Studies after studies that show urban communities with well-managed parks, lower rates of crime, higher property values, better physical condition of the occupants, increased mental health. Studies after studies show that when kids engage in outdoor learning as part of their education, you have higher attendance rates. So you think about some of the issues of our great cities, you have higher grades, higher college placement. Not that everyone needs to go to college, but there's so many
outstanding. The opportunity to go to college, though?
Yes, it needs to be equitable. It needs to be inclusive. It needs to be just. But
hold on a second. I'm sorry, time is always an issue, even on public broadcasting. What the heck is the connection between the way our parks have been set up and institutional structural racism? What's the connection?
That's a great question. So prior to the I'd say the 2000s, prior to Jim McGreevey, the state overwhelmingly spent its dollars for land acquisition outside of our great urban centers. And it was, understandable at the time. It was a race for space, right? So as suburbs are building out, we want to buy up the lands in the hinterland so it protects our water, it protects open space and so forth. Understandable at the time, but boy, we inadvertently left so many folks from New Jersey behind. We hear about food deserts, we talk about public health deserts, we also have park deserts in this state. So this is really about reinvesting in areas that have been treated in an unjust manner. The same communities that have the very high pollution loads, also the poor air quality, tend to also have a lot fewer acres of open space. I had mentioned this to someone earlier. I grew up in Atlantic County, outside of Atlantic City. There was an old train line that was being converted rails to trails. The town I grew up in, Linwood, was overwhelmingly white. The train line went from Summers Point through Linwood to Northfield and then into Pleasantville, which was an overwhelmingly, at the time, African-American community. What I heard as an 8- and 9-year-old in my town was we can't let the trail run to Pleasantville because it's going to become a criminal highway. Not for my parents, but that was the conversation. I mean, that is wrong on so many levels. So
and public policy often reflected that rhetoric?
If you actually look at where the dollars were being spent, yes, it was consistent with that rhetoric and that pattern. Even recently, talking about creating an open space, someone approached New Jersey Audubon about taking open space in Somerset Hills. And we said, okay, well, we have to make this accessible to the public in order, to get, and this is a fair trade-off. We have fought tooth and nail for this. If you're going to get property tax abatement, it has to be available for the public. And it was Tom Gilmore, past CEO, chatting with me, and we said, okay, but this is and the person was hemming and hawing it. And we finally forced the conversation. We said, who are you worried about specifically coming to park here? He said, well, are you going to have buses from Newark? Now,
So
this is not,
So there it is.
There it is, right there. It's a mic drop
today,
moment.
okay, so we're going into 2022. It is still there. For those who question, come on, Steve, why are you guys doing so much on racism? Why confront our series confronting racism? You see it out there. Enough already. We got the message, but a lot of it's in the past. Is it?
Well, I would say that it isn't in the past, but there is some good news. Starting with
give us some good news. Got about a minute left. Give me some good news.
Starting with Governor Jim McGreevey, the expenditures of state open space funds have flowed back tremendously to our city. So if you look at the expenditures from 2000 to the present, really beginning to reinvest in these great cities.
P.S. I live in Essex County. The county government, and because someone we've interviewed before, Joe DiVincenzo, the county executive, the amount of urban park activity is off the charts. That's not editorializing, it's a fact. I'm sorry, go ahead.
And look at the new Greenway, the Montclair to Jersey City. What
the Greenway, Montclair to Jersey City, could you ride your bike?
$60 million. Awesome. So we're beginning to put our money where our mouth is. Before, I'd say that we would say that our issues were colorblind, were race blind, but they weren't. It followed a lot of the same policies, exclusionary zoning and so forth. I think in New Jersey, the future is bright. We are at this tipping point. And New Jersey is also the tip of the spear. We're very diverse. We're a highly educated, highly affluent state. We have a ways to go, but we have all of the right ingredients to be successful.
Hey, Eric, this is the first time you've joined us. Let's make sure it is not the last. We learned a lot from you. We appreciate the work that you and your colleagues at the New Jersey Audubon are doing every day. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Steve.
You got it. I'm Steve Adubato. That is Eric Stiles. See you next time.
State of Affairs with Steve Adubato is a production of the Caucus Educational Corporation. Funding has been provided by Hackensack Meridian Health, the Turrell Fund, supporting Reimagine Childcare. PNC, Grow Up Great. NJM Insurance Group, the New Jersey Education Association, the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities Clean Energy Program, the Northward Center, the Russell Berry Foundation, and by NJ Best, New Jersey's 529 College Savings Plan. Promotional support provided by Jaffe Communications and by Insider NJ.
NJM Insurance Company has been serving New Jersey policyholders for more than 100 years. But just who are NJM's policyholders? They're the men and women who teach our children, the public sector employees who maintain our infrastructure, the workers who craft our manufactured goods, and New Jersey's next generation of leaders, the people who make our state a great place to call home. NJM, we've got New Jersey covered.